Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Surf and Sales Podcast. I'm Scott Leese here with my good buddy, Richard Harris. And we are pumped to have the one and only head of sales development at chorus.ai, Becc Holland, here with us. We've all known each other for a couple years now. And Becc, we've been really impressed and proud of what you've been doing over the last couple years. You've really kind of grown into your own. You got a big brand and a big following now, and going out on tour. So welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm honestly super excited to be here today. I have followed both of your work and loved you guys for several years now. So yeah, pumped to be here.
Cool. We met a few years ago back at Rainmaker, and you were working for Gong, I believe, at the time, and you stayed in the same kind of field, but your role has shifted a little bit, right? If memory serves, weren't you in marketing a little bit previously, earlier in your career?
So I actually have a marketing background. My degree was in marketing. I was an AE for about five or so years back in Texas. And then when I came to the Bay Area, I decided to take a step back into sales development just so I could learn more about the ecosystem before I went back into closing. But from the Gong, when I was at Gong, I was doing sales dev only. I would actually say I'm more in marketing now at Chorus than I was in my previous role. So it's been an interesting shift.
Yeah, so we were just talking about this the other day with Jack Kosakowski, and my opinion is like the line between sales and marketing and SDR and even account manager is like disappearing, and the role is kind of merging and morphing into one thing where top AEs need to be good at all these different skills. Do you feel like your marketing background really prepared you for what you're doing now, running sales development for Chorus?
Yeah, 100%. It was actually kind of my love for marketing that really got me excited about the role at Chorus. So, over here at Chorus, it's like I have the luxury, and I think one of the things that made me make the jump is I have the luxury of we are salespeople selling to salespeople. Right. So our content, the things that we're doing is very up the alley of my, quote unquote, expertise. And so I think having that luxury is really interesting. It's a really high bar because if you don't sell the best and if you don't have something really interesting to say, then it kind of invalidates you as a leader, your reps, and then your product at its base. But I think what's really interesting about it is I traversed into marketing really easily because, the core job function of what I was running is what we're essentially marketing. So I'm involved in the content marketing or, the product marketing. We did SDR views that is specific for SDRs. And so I got to be really involved there and even with the product team. And then I've, gotten to work with the partnerships team quite a bit because we're dealing with sales engagement vendors or data providers. Just because the core function expertise is right up the sales development alley. So long tail to answer your question, definitely I think marketing is a great start for anyone because it gives you really a deep dive into psychology and how people tick and what they want to hear and the kind of value that they want to be brought to the table. I think it's a great background for anyone going into a sales role or sales development role.
Let me ask you this question. Do you report to marketing or how do you report right now? What's your structure?
I do report into marketing. So I've reported in the past into marketing, revenue, and sales, all three. But right now I work with the marketing team. And so I think, part of it's a narcissistic thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. And there's always, different answers from different people. I come from the school that I think, the development team should come into the sales side, but where do you think it fits best? Is it under a revenue team? Is it under a marketing team? Is it under a sales team? And from your perspective, what makes you think that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Probably an exposing question. From my perspective, I think there are pros and cons to both, to answering into marketing and sales. From what I've seen in the industry, if you answer into sales, there's no real accountability there of like what's qualified. And usually the leader is a VP of sales who is really focused on the sales team and they understand sales development a little less than your average leader. And so the pro there is you are linked to the sales team, which is what you're trying to drive pipeline for. The con there is the bar seems to raise and raise and raise on what is qualified if you answer into sales. On the marketing end, if you answer into them, I think the pro there is you're really making the funnel a funnel, meaning you're following up with MQLs, content downloads, webinar registrants, event attendees, etc. The con is I have seen the definition of ICP and the definition of MQL be really loose. And so, for instance, most marketing departments coin ICP or a great MQL on level of engagement and company size. So what you get is a bunch of interns from Oracle who have downloaded a lot of your stuff that is defined as a high engagement, MQL. And it's like, okay, great, this person's downloading a lot of my stuff, but title, comes into play very heavily. If you talk to any sales team, one of the main leading indicators of success is title. So if you answer into marketing, from my experience, if you don't gear it correctly from an infrastructure standpoint, you get them following up on a bunch of event leads because marketing really wants to prove the ROI of all of their events and, different initiatives. And sometimes at the expense of doing the behaviors that would provide the most high quality leads to the sales team, regardless of the source of attribution.
Wow, that is the best answer I've ever heard. Seriously, like genius answer. Obviously, there's no correct answer, but literally you dove right in. I think I know what the next question Scott's going to ask about marketing and tied to revenue, right?
That's right. So at what point will marketing share the revenue quota with sales and move away from MQL, SQLs, meeting sets being the ultimate metric that they're engaged on, right? So personal experience, and what I've seen, I've yet to see a VP of marketing get tossed out the door because they hit 85% of their MQL number for the quarter or for the year. Certainly seen VPs of sales get tossed out the door for achieving similar revenue numbers. So do you think we're going that direction? And are you in favor of that? Or is the marketing team there ready to sign up for that?
I think there's a lot of questions in there. Are we going that direction? We should. Are we? I don't know. Someone who signs up.
We're recording this, so I'm going to tell Roy that you said so.
So I agree with you. I think a lot of
agrees with me.
What?
Step one to me is like more people, first of all, speaking about this, right? And then more people agreeing and being willing to put their neck out there a little bit and say, I agree with this, right?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is you go to someone in an org who is not in a sales role and they'll say, well, sales is, over glamorized. These are people that they don't really do that much. Like, is talking really a skill? And the interesting thing about sales, or one of the difficulties of sales, is your neck is in the line, like on the line for every single decision that you're making. If you don't hit quota, it's the highest churn role, because if you don't hit this metric, then it's like, okay, you're out the door. So I think the real problem is not necessarily that marketing's not doing a good job, or that sales dev isn't doing a good job. I think the real issue is the funnel is not a funnel. For every org that I've seen, the funnel is not a true funnel. And I'll give you an example. From the sales development perspective, if I pass over an appointment, you usually say this is an SQL. And there is some kind of acceptance criterion or decline process of like, this is an SAL or an opt, it's an opportunity, or this wasn't a real opportunity and there's a decline process on there. Every marketing department that I've seen doesn't have the same process, even though from my perspective, it should be mirrored onto marketing. From the sales development reps, we should be able to go back to an MQL for most people, most orgs that I've seen, is someone who downloaded content, someone who attended a webinar, someone who went to an event, or best case scenario from the outbound perspective, someone who hits a profile. But again, someone who downloads my content just because they're interested in us, that certainly does not mean we're interested in them. So from my view, one of the quick tips that I think could help drive, make the funnel an actual funnel as opposed to just something that's in theory but actually isn't working out, is that sales development teams should be able to decline marketing leads and say, like, this is great that this person downloaded my content, but we don't want to talk to them. We don't want to sell into them.
Preach.
Say it again for the people in the back of the room. Just say it again.
So there should be a decline process from my perspective where sales development can decline marketing leads if they think this is an MQL, just like sales development says this is an SQL. And there should be a decline process that sales development teams should be able, either from an automated fashion using your sales ops team is what we do here at Chorus, but there should be a manual trigger of like, hey, this person isn't even involved with the company. This is a Gmail address. Like, this certainly isn't any kind of buyer. I get it that they downloaded 20 pieces of content, but they have no money and they cannot buy our product. And so even though we have these falsely inflated MQL numbers for marketing. And so marketing's cheering, sales development's cheering, the sales team isn't cheering because they're not hitting their goals. And everyone's solution to the problem is, let's just pour more budget into top of funnel and let's get more of these MQLs without any infrastructure to support it. So I think the funnel is the biggest issue from an infrastructure standpoint that should be delineated out to a CRO to figure out, but it's the biggest pain point and sore spot for orgs of why their revenue isn't increasing.
What would you do? Give people a couple of tactics, right? Because we're speaking pretty high level. What would you do to improve the funnel then? Aside from, hey, because currently the answer might be, well, we're using Marketo, so yeah, we think if someone downloads 20 pieces of content, we should at least talk to them, right? Or we've got a scoring system in place so that when they do 4 touches, then it goes over to the sales development team, right? Like, what other kinds of things do you think could improve that process for those who are listening?
Yeah, so I don't, oh my gosh, I'm going to get grilled for this. I'm going to get hate mail for this.
No, that's the best kind of mail to get, because that means you're doing it right.
I do not back lead scoring how it is defined to date.
Tell us more about that.
Lead scoring is basically based on how much content someone downloads, but that's like saying that someone comes up to me at a bar 50 times and asks me out on a date, and this isn't someone that I want to go on a date on. It shouldn't matter how many times they ask me, do you want to drink? I'm going to decline them every single time. So from an MQL infrastructure standpoint, what I've done to solve for why, if you will, is I basically bifurcate out to say, like, okay, this is a content download, this is a webinar registrant, this is an event attendee, this is, I even go so far as to use dark funnel leads like G2, people are viewing you on G2, Trust Radius, Bombora, 6 Sense, firmographic triggers, through Crunchbase, like IPO, company funding, or hypergrowth sales team. But essentially, how you can solve for why is by splitting up all your efforts from a marketing standpoint, and then saying not only what was the resultant ROI of this, like, let's get to that a little bit later, but out of these campaigns that we ran, what are the kinds of people that downloaded this content? And if they don't hit my minimum bar of who I want to sell into, then they are essentially shedded out into nurture campaigns, and we don't follow up with them. It doesn't matter how many pieces of content they're downloading. I'm not going to reach out to someone 20,000 times and ask them if they want to spend 15 minutes with me if we can't sell into them. So, from an infrastructure standpoint or an operational view, we are shedding those out into our nurture stream and only surfacing into what I call postbound campaigns if they hit the minimum bar of what we want to sell into from a company standpoint and also from a title standpoint. So for all the individual contributors out there who are downloading your content, if you can't sell into an individual contributor, if you're not a B2C model, then it's like, I want them to know who Chorus is. I want them from a brand perspective, of course, to know what we do and who we are. And, they move up into a management role, et cetera, like they like who we are. But I don't want to reach out to them right now because my AEs would be, furious if I put a bunch of individual contributors on the line who don't necessarily, quote unquote, have, all of the buying power in the world. So I think splitting up all of those different campaigns, getting data, and only passing over to, the sales development team, the ones that hit the bar of who you want to sell into, is paramount.
Becc, you just wrote, I think, your entire book in that answer, right? Like, seriously, you say you're going to get hate mail. I think you're going to get job offers, right? Like, people are going to be like, this is a better way. Like, really, And the funny thing is, I'm hearing this from the sales side because that's my perspective. And I'd be curious to know how many other marketing people actually do follow what you're saying, right? There's, maybe you're the first one, but hopefully people are getting it, right? And I know I'm sales biased. I'm culturally biased on that one.
Right.
But that was powerful. That's awesome.
Beck, are you finding your leadership style evolving? As you really articulated that last segment really well, with clarity and confidence. How are you evolving as a leader? And what are the things that you're doing?
Yeah, I think from the management perspective, communicating that and teaching these ideas, whether that's internally or whether that's externally, is a skill set that is constantly being developed for me. So, it's great if you have an idea, but if you don't have the internal buy-in and you don't have, people who are really on deck with you and can see the results from this, then it's really hard to deploy what you're talking about. And so from a leadership perspective, it kind of gets back to the original driver of me doing some content is I just wanted to help people hit more quota. Whether that's funnel metrics, whether that's KPI systems, whether that's infrastructure of pass through, whether that's tactically, I just wanted to help people hit more quota. And so I'm like, I have used kind of as a megaphone of the content over here of like, I'm just going to tell you what's worked for us and how I've solved for these problems. The really interesting thing, and I think, one thing that I respect about the two of you is you're both practitioners at the end of the day of like, we know if something's working because we're deploying it on the phones or we're deploying it internally and we see if that actually works or not. So, long tail, again, answer to your question from the leadership perspective, I'm always constantly looking to learn, to grow. If I don't know more tomorrow than I did today, I might as well have just stayed in bed. So I have an insatiable hunger to know what other people are doing. Is it working for them? And if not, I'm going to always ask the question of, if this thing isn't working, we have to do something better. So, if marketing is cheering because they think that they're sending over a bunch of great leads, and sales development is cheering because they think they're sending over a bunch of great appointments, and sales isn't cheering, one question you ask is, how is the conversations that they're having? Is there some room to grow there? But the other two questions you have to ask is, why are two of my departments doing so well? And why is my third department, the revenue department, not actually hitting their goals? And how can I, from a leadership perspective, either work together with those two peers within sales and marketing, or, flesh out some kind of different process angle, to make sure that sales is actually hitting their goals? Because that's what we're all after, is like revenue, so how can I work together with these two people internally, not see them as someone who's against me, but see them as, two teammates in the goal of like, how can we make more revenue from a company perspective?
Do you think the type of talent that you need to hire now is different than you did 1, 2, 5 years ago? Are you evaluating it the same way?
Yeah, I like, as I go on, I almost think it's unfair to the SDRs that I hired today, because it's like, as I grow, I want to work with people, who I can grow and who can grow me both. And so the critical thinkers that I'm looking for today are the ones who can, get the system that I'm handing out to them, even from the messaging or from the pass-through perspective, and then challenge me on why are we hooking like this when it's not working, so they can help me grow out the scripts and out the department from the ground up.
It's tricky though. I say this as somebody who's a little bit older than you and in leadership for a little bit longer. Like, one of the hardest things as you go on is, when you have this insatiable kind of desire to learn and grow and you're pushing yourself, your patience and tolerance for working with people who are not at your level diminishes. And you have to dig really, really deep and like harness the teacher in you, right? Because it's not some of these kids' fault that they don't know this stuff yet, right? Sure. And you got to go, oh fuck, I got to go back to like kindergarten level and start all over again. And when you first move into leadership and management, you're like all fired up about that. But 10, 15, 20 years later, you're like, oh my God, do I really have to have this conversation again? Right?
Yeah.
It's called the get off my lawn syndrome.
I think it's really interesting that you bring that up, because you're right. You do have to dig with a lot of reps. And again, I'm leading entry level. And a good example is one of the guys on the team over here, he was onboarding basically with me. And I said, okay, let's go into a training session. I'm kind of evaluating where you're at. And I'll never forget, he asked me, what does SAS stand for? And I'm like,
yeah.
Okay, he is our top performer now. He's our top performer. And that is so fun to see someone ramp that quickly. And so, I mean, to answer your question, kind of from the get off my lawn syndrome, what I have to constantly ask myself is, who the hell do I think I am? Because I was there at one point.
Yeah.
And am I the kind of leader that would have given myself a shot? Or am I going to be the relative D-bag who thinks so highly of herself that she simply, cannot work with someone who doesn't know what SAS
imagine all the hiring managers out there who would not have hired that particular individual if they would have said that or asked that question in the interview process, right?
Yeah.
This goes back to our pre-session, which is, isn't it ironic, right?
Yes.
This is our, my first comment, Beck's pulling her Alanis Morissette, so this sort of fits in perfectly. For those of you who are only listening, when you get to the viewing stage, it'll be more fun. But I completely agree, and I have to do that a lot too. Like, I think the place I see it the most, because I'm not practicing, I'm not a hiring manager, I'm not hiring people, I'm not interviewing people that much, but it's the same thing on LinkedIn, right? Like, there's a lot of for lack of a better word, I call it LinkedIn porn, right? Whether it's the, hey, it looks like you're doing some amazing things in your profile, right? I get that daily. I'd love to connect with you. Yeah. And I kind of have to remind myself that they just don't know, right? Or I have to at least give them the benefit of the doubt that they don't know that that's what they should be doing, or they shouldn't be doing it that way, right? And rather than blasting them. So
I'll differ with you a little bit. Like, I'll give some people the benefit of the doubt.
Well, this is fair. I think that's fair too. Yeah.
If you're sending me stuff like that, and you've been a practitioner for, a good deal of time, or you have an executive level title, like, get off my lawn, right? but if you're junior, like, then I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, because I feel bad. Like, nobody told you, like, nobody taught you, right? And that's why I think, for what you're doing, Becc, and, much of my career has been spent, nurturing and guiding people at the very earliest stages of their career, all the way through VP level, and you have to enjoy being a teacher at some level. You can't lose that. And when you lose that desire to teach, and your patience disappears, it's time to take a break, or it's time to move on, because you're doing everybody a disservice,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Usually for me, when I get to those points, I realize that what I think is it's time for an ego check for me. And I think back to this moment. I don't know if you've ever seen The Devil Wears Prada. Have you guys seen that movie?
No, I have not.
Okay. Well, you're missing out, Scott. But
Scott, you would actually like it. Like, it's a very fascinating psychology movie. You would enjoy it.
Yeah, sure, Richard. So anywho, the Devil Wears Prada is basically about this girl who is a journalist, and she wants to be a journalist, and she becomes an assistant for a very well-known editor it's actually mimicked off of the now editor for Vogue. And she's not into fashion, doesn't know, her name in the movie is Miranda Priestley, is the editor in Vogue. And so at the beginning, she's just coming in to get a job and work with Miranda Priestley because she's so well known and she wants to work her way up in the journalism world. At any rate, she starts becoming more and more and more into the fashion world. And she kind of has this come to Jesus moment where she realizes she needs to kind of buy in here. And she starts dressing better and, really getting into the fashion world. And there's this moment at the end of the movie where she thinks back to the first scene. And in the first scene, she's just like eating cereal and reading through these articles, and she doesn't have any makeup on, and she's, you know, dressed pretty poorly. And I have that moment a lot when I think of myself. You know, at the end of the day, it was like I was an account executive that was selling HVAC equipment and mechanical construction projects to a bunch of, you know, good old boys back in Texas. I moved out to the Bay Area because, you know, personal reasons. I wanted to be with my grandparents because they lived out there. But I took my first crack in tech, you know, when at the age of 29 years old. And I remember at my first job in tech, I worked for a MarTech company called Adjust. And in the intro onboarding session, they said, okay, so you're an SDR now. So first let's talk about mobile SDKs. And in my head, I thought SDR stood for Sales Development Rep, and that SDK stood for Sales Development Kit. Okay.
Sales Development Kid, KID?
Kit, like a little kit that you get, like whenever you start in sales development. So I kind of have that Anne Hathaway Devil Wears Prada moment when I think of that was, you know, 5 years ago for me.
Not that long ago.
And so it wasn't too long ago. And so when I'm viewing these reps who are coming in, you know, right out of college, you know, they don't know what SaaS stands for. I think about that moment 5 years ago. And I think about, even more importantly, the leaders that nurtured me, you know, Richard being one of them. He gave me my first shot at basically a training Tuesday with AISP and plugged me, you know, after a conversation that we had. But I think back to those moments whenever I'm thinking that I can't train these people, or, you know, they're just so far behind me, because it grounds me a little bit more and it makes me excited for them and makes me really, really have an invigorated desire and heart to train them, because at one stage, not too long ago, that was me.
That's great.
Why don't you tell people, because on occasion, some people might not know, what is an SDK?
An SDK is basically a piece of software that you can put into an app to help track the performance of an app.
And it stands for Software Development Kit.
Yes, Software Development Kit.
That's the whole point of the story. I want to make sure people who didn't know.
It is Software Development Kit. It is not an intro kit that you get in sales development of, like, you know, pencils and pens and erasers for
Tell us, you know, tell the audience about the exciting news, and you're going out on tour with Scott and not me, different Scott Barker and Josh Braun and some other cool people will be in different cities and whatnot. Tell the audience what you're up to.
Yeah, so it's going to be really exciting. We're branding it the Flip the Script North American Tour. Really fancy name. Basically, the TLDR of it was I started a series when I was at G2 Crowd, where basically I just wanted to train SDRs for free. It was kind of like an after hours, you know, bought a couple of pizza boxes, just kind of an after hours school project that I started with my buddy. But we did 5 sessions. It got more traction than I ever imagined. Super encouraging. So anywho, we are doing a and I branded it like Flip the Script, just because we're flipping back from mass blast to personalization, and hopefully flipping the industry back from, you know, these templates and, you know, selling in a certain manner back to one with, you know, integrity and creativity, where they could really say some interesting, compelling stuff to their prospects. The tour is going to be 9 cities, 16 days. It's for free, which is really exciting. Where we're
best part for everybody. Everybody out there is like, oh, it's free 99. I'm in.
Free 99. So basically, we're going to be covering 3 different sessions for every city. The cities, we're going to be jumping in a bus going from Boston to New York to Chicago to Atlanta to Austin to Denver, Salt Lake, Seattle, and finishing in San Francisco. And basically, all the sessions are going to be after hours, are going to be for free. We're going to be covering unicorn reps, what they're doing, what are their attributes, how do they organize their day, and what are they saying tactically to be very different and crush quota. Josh is going to follow up with direct mail, gatekeepers, voicemail, and who is your buyer and how to make them more happy. And then I'm going to finish off with email, cold calls, and sequences, how to build sequences within your sales engagement platform to make the whole thing sustainable.
Great stuff. If anybody's out there, you know, and able to go to one of these events, it's in your city, you should definitely go check it out.
You should particularly go to Austin, because actually Scott's going to be joining us in Austin.
Yes, Scott Leese. Yeah, I'm excited.
Scott Leese. You're going to be hosted by Scott Barker, so it's going to be the Scotts.
Yeah, we get along really well. We had a joke about that. He was actually in attendance at Surf and Sales 3 in September last year, and we were talking about forming a company called the Two Scotts.
Yeah,
just as a joke.
Scott with a little 2 in the top right hand corner.
Scott 2 crowd. Yeah, that's what it'll be.
Exactly, Scott squared. That's awesome. And no, I'm not jealous. So it's okay. I know Becc will get me on the next tour. He's gonna save me for later. So Becc, we end this, and I've been on mute a little bit because there's construction going on in my house, but I'll ask this question while it's quiet, I hope. You know, we always like to end these things a little differently and say, how can we help you? Like, what can we do for you to help further your business, your life, your career? Like, how can we help Becc? Because you've given us a lot, you've given the audience a lot to do something, so we want to give it back a little bit to you.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. Well, I knew there's a lot of ways from a wisdom perspective you guys could help me. I know that you've got a lot of experience. One thing in specific that's top of mind for me is, as I go into this tour, this is a very first for me of, you know, how to set up different dates, what to, you know, cover during those dates. So my question was, and it might be a niche one, you know, you're welcome to not answer it if you don't want to, but a lot of times during these sessions, I know that the session that you guys ran, from what I understood, was 3 hours. Did I get that right? 3 or 3.5 hours?
Yes, she's talking about the event that Richard and I held in Austin, Texas, in November.
Yeah.
It was scheduled for 3 hours, and I think we went damn near 4.
Yeah. So that's a long time.
It was like a 5 p.m. to almost 9 p.m. thing.
Yeah. So that's a long time to really keep people engaged and keep them, you know, fresh, at least from, you know, from my view. So my question to you is, you know, our sessions are going to be starting at 5, or they're going to be starting at 6 o'clock and running until 8:20 with a Q&A on the end. My question is, how do you, what's your take on keeping people engaged, you know, bathroom breaks, et cetera? Like, how do you make it palatable? You know, back to your point on teaching and, you know, leadership. What's your best tips on how to keep them, you know, engaged, learning, open, and what's the right cadence there to keep people really involved?
I'll go first on this one. You know, as we all know, our attention span is extremely short and limited these days. You know, so one of the things that I tried to do, at least, was I asked people to politely get rid of their phone, put it away. I had no problem being bold enough to be like, hey, I'm up here, you're here for a reason. Like, let's stop worrying about your fucking Twitter feed and your, you know, your boyfriend, girlfriend texting you or whatever. Like, put it down, right? Just put it down. You know, most people did, not everybody, but most people is a win over where we started, right? The other thing was, we kept our little segments as short as possible and rotated, right? So it was like Scott for 30 minutes, Richard for 30 minutes, quick break for 10 minutes, Scott for 30 minutes, Richard. You see what I'm saying? So
yeah,
there was no stretch, never a stretch where somebody had to sit for an hour. And so it was like, I can't remember whose quote this is, but it was like, you know, be brief and be brilliant or something like that, right? It's like, get in, get out, onto the next kind of thing. And so it felt like there was a good pace and a good rhythm with not too much of a lull. And the last thing I'll leave you with is, you know, people who come to your event, yeah, they're interested in the content, but you know what? They're interested in you, you know? And I think if you're delivering the material, this is your event, like, you got to recognize and appreciate that these people have given up whatever else they could be doing with their lives to come talk to you. And so Richard and I stayed around well beyond, you know, 9 o'clock, shaking hands and having conversations with people and whatnot, and putting in, you know, putting in some extra time. Right? It's like I think of like the athlete who sticks around after the game and comes back out of the locker room and signs a million autographs, kind of thing, right? And so that would be my advice to, like, you know, those are a couple things to think about. Get people to put their phone away. Number one, ask them to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Number two, short segments, changing topics, so people don't have to sit there for too long. And then, you know, as somebody who's delivering the content, stick around. You know, be there for your audience, right? Make the last audience member leave before you do, kind of thing. I don't know, Richard. Hopefully, you have more.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things, and this is only because I'm a little bit of the logistics on this. One is,
you are the logistics on this.
Yeah. And to Scott's quotes, it's, you know, be brief, be brilliant, and be gone.
Thank
right?
you.
But the brain will only absorb as much as the butt will tolerate. And I know this is really weird, but you know, you literally sit there and you go, okay, what kind of chairs am I going to rent? Well, you got to rent the padded chairs.
Yeah.
If you get hardwood chairs, they're uncomfortable. Like nobody's going to sit there. And I remember talking to Scott, and I'm like, Scott, you know, these chairs are $3 a piece versus $1.25. What do you think? You know, it's costing us a $75 difference, you know. And Scott's like, just like, why are you even asking? And this is how Scott is, like, why are you even asking? Just do it. Like, you know, so, but Scott also likes to watch the pennies. So, so one is, I think you have to create some comfort. I think the other thing too is we had quality food, which was really important, I think, so that it was more than pizza and beer. I thought that, you know, we got a caterer to come in, and it's not that much more expensive, in my opinion. And I think that keeps people around, and sort of piggybacking off what Scott said, look, you know, people come because they want to hear the content, right? They want to hear you, they want to hear Scott, they want to hear Barker, they want to hear all these different people you're having to come. And if after 2.5 hours they got to get up and leave, then so be it, they leave.
Yeah.
Like it's no big deal. Don't worry about that, because there are people like, you know, if it's me, I may have a family obligation. I've got 2 kids. Like I can't, but the fact that they're coming to see you for the first hour or 2 is what matters the most, because they've made the effort. So don't worry about, oh my God, you know, it's a webinar. Did we keep everybody engaged all 45 minutes kind of thing.
Right.
And then the other piece I would say too is be tight on your content. Really, really tight. You've been to enough of these, you know, whether it's Rev, which used to be Rainmaker, or if you go to Unleash, you know, or Dreamforce, know your content. Make sure your speakers know their content, because there's nothing worse than somebody getting up there and droning because they think they can wing it. They think they know what to say.
Right.
Don't let that happen. That's when you lose people, in my opinion. And then the last thing I would say too is, like, at the beginning of the session, or, you know, I definitely believe in taking breaks for every 45 minutes, 45 minutes content, 15-minute break, 45-minute content, 15-minute break. People need that because they start to socialize around what they just heard anyway, right? Or they connect. And that's another piece of this that's not thought of as valuable. So you don't want to keep them in their seats that long. They won't sit. It's not comfortable. And you can even tell people, like, hey, as we get into hour 2 and 3, if you need to stand and lean against the wall, go for it. Like, I tell people to do that all the time in my training. Like, you don't have to sit in the chair. It's there, but stretch your legs. So those are my advice things around this kind of stuff.
So I think that's all solid advice that I will take to the bank. I also had one more question for you both, if you
bonus question.
Do I get bonus round?
You got a bonus question. Let's do it.
I'm relatively new to this game. I feel like you guys have a lot of experience.
What game specifically are you referring to?
Let's just call it a game of life. You guys are...
She's kindly telling us...
How do I politely call people old on the podcast?
Old as dirt, Richard. Yeah. You realize we're in increments of 8, the 3 of us. You realize that, right?
We are.
Yes.
Are you a millennial, Becc?
She doesn't want to answer it. Let her get to her question.
My question is, I have seen both of you and how you operate with people, and you both seem to have this knack for, I don't want to put something so trite as the word of networking on it, but you really add value to the communities around you. And you have both introduced me to people that are way out of my league. And so my question is, what is your strategy or perspective on adding value to those around you so that you have just have that really enriched community and have that really enriched network around you, to help you get to the next stage?
All right, I'll answer that. So I think there were 2 or 3 pieces that I did consciously, and some I just did, right? So when I first started doing things, I just started adding to the community. I had no agenda. I was actually unemployed. This was before I started the consulting business. And I was going through my, interview phase, and I was like, oh my God, I feel worthless. I'm not feeling, like whatever. And I finally realized if I started commenting on people's stuff on LinkedIn, people liked what I said, right?
Yeah.
Or they would thumbs up my stuff. And then that gave me validation that I knew what I was doing was I was saying the right stuff, which I was a little concerned about, but more importantly, I didn't realize it was going to make me feel good. Like, hey, I may not have a job right now, but I'm helping somebody else in their career. So that for me is where it all came from. Then I figured out the strategy of it, of more LinkedIn connections, which type of connections I wanted, how to scale my LinkedIn connections, and then started sharing that with Scott. And then he and I started going back and forth on this. So we, that was my foray into it. And I worry less about whether what I'm adding is valuable to the community, other than the fact that I add it, because even if I'm wrong, that's still value to the community. And I welcome that, right? So I do try to be a little controversial, a little snarky.
Yeah.
I do want people to respond. I want to engage. And I don't worry about having to be right all the time. At least I don't think I try to worry about being right. I don't know.
So,
Maybe deeper,
What about off LinkedIn? Let's put LinkedIn aside and the whole game there, because where I've seen you both be particularly strong is off LinkedIn. As I noticed that, Richard, you're a great example. You've introduced me to, 2 people that I can think of that worked with major enterprise brands just for a conversation because you wanted to, kind of thing. So what is your mindset, doing something like that, putting social aside?
That's just karma for me, but I'll let Scott go ahead and jump in.
I'll take that one. And this has nothing to do with LinkedIn or, whatever kind of fake ass LinkedIn celebrity bullshit, someone might talk to us about. So I'll tell you a little story. Okay. In 2010, I think, I went to work for this little tiny startup called Main Street Hub in San Francisco. And that company moved to Austin, Texas when we only had a couple people. Okay. The first 5 people on my team were all entry level. One was like a mid-ish level salesperson. All right. Those 5 people are now, be patient with me for a second, head of sales operations, VP of customer success, VP of sales at a Series B startup, VP of sales at a mega software company, and senior enterprise strategic account rep at a software company. So my point is, I have, to the best of my ability, stayed in contact with people and made it a point to try to guide and mentor and help them along the way, years upon years after they stopped working for me and with me. And now I do that. I feel like I have a little bit larger platform even to do that. And now I do that with people that I don't even know, for no other reason than, like I said, who the fuck am I? You know what I mean? Like, in 2001, I was dying, right? I spent 4 years battling stuff. I was a dope fiend. Like, I can barely get out of bed sometimes, and Richard knows this because I'm in so much pain or I'm so sick. And like, I've been very blessed. I'm shooting for like $1 million business this year. Who the fuck am I though? Right? Somebody gave me a shot at one point in time. All these different roles I have. So I just think it would be extremely selfish and disrespectful for me to not try to give guidance and advice and help and nurture people and develop people, to the best of my ability. And I don't give a shit about the LinkedIn stuff. That's just real life.
Same. Yeah, because the reason I asked the question is, I mean, both of you have been there for me at different times when there was nothing in it for you. Through some more difficult time or just to be a sounding board. And so I was just wondering, if that was a piece of it, or, how that had influenced your,
Well, I think, I think what will happen is you will appreciate that in the way that you do now. And I think that you'll start to become that person for other people.
Yeah.
And the more people like us, and the more people like you, and that will spread to people underneath you. And so we need more of that, in all kinds of professions and all walks of life. So anyway, before we get too sappy and hug it out too much here at the very end, Becc, enjoyed this a lot. I think it was fantastic. I think there's a lot of good nuggets in there. I think people are going to be really impressed and blown away by it.
We have to call it the Surf and Marketing Campaign. That was such a good marketing segment. That was really good. It was really, really good.
And one of these days we'll get her down to Costa Rica or Mexico or Nicaragua or something like that.
I would love it. Roy, if you're listening, I want to go.
Roy will listen.
Oh, let's go, Roy.
Come on, Roy. Come on, Roy.
All right, Becc. Take care.
Thank you so much.
It was awesome.
Thank you so much, guys.